I'm going to level with you. You can run, but you can't hide. I'm Ray Myers. Welcome to Craft versus Cruft. And this is a little bit of a downer, this episode. If you're not in the mood for that, you might skip it and come back to it. I've got plenty of other cheerful episodes, but this is the topic of the day, and I think there is no way to talk about this honestly without getting our hands a little dirty. So let's get our hands a little dirty. This is Layoff Dodging 101. I think we need to get to fundamentals here. A lot of the useful advice is going to flow naturally from just a basic understanding of what it is we're talking about here. So I'm going to, in some detail, talk about what a layoff even is, and I hope you'll see why that's helpful. Maybe we'll do something later where I go into more detail about how you might defend yourself. But I think in a few sentences, it's all really hinted at here in this post I made yesterday. I have some more nuanced posts on layoffs from around the same time. This is the one, obviously, that people gravitated to. Quippy, slightly confusing ones tend to get the traction, so we'll start here. Posted here the screenshot of someone's GitHub flame graph. This is a real person's GitHub flame graph. It is really the flame graph of someone who happened to have been laid off that morning. However, I didn't see their flame graph first. I just heard that someone that I knew and admired had been laid off, and then I noticed their flame graph was incredibly dense, so I just posted it to play on the running gag we've got about flame graphs. When you do something tongue-in-cheek and then you make a serious point, sometimes people lose track of when you stop being serious. So I think there are some people that thought that I think that the way you should judge employees is by their GitHub flame graph. And as we like to say in the Midwest, bless your heart. If you want to see me talk about how we really should try to be productive and model productivity, I have 2 hours of material on this very channel. You could watch at your leisure. At no point do I say we should evaluate each other by our GitHub flame graph. We should engage in a lot of the behaviors that this person does really engage in and is widely known for. You were a major contributor to the Java ecosystem going back over 15 years. They created a library called Guava, which is widely used. Juice as well. The reason I didn't try to make that whole case and name them, even though they were public about their layoff, it's no secret, is that it wasn't the point. The point is, it doesn't matter what your numbers or what your achievements are, you're not safe. That is the point. Job security, an illusion. You need career security. You need to know where your next opportunity might be coming from. That's what I mean by that. And that could include many things that you could do to kind of defend yourself against this. People say networking, bit of a buzzword, but it is a real thing. Career branding, keeping your skills up to date, knowing the market is huge. But if you think you can dodge a layoff just by being a better employee, I got a bridge to sell you. This person's kind of got it. They say, hey, anyone could get laid off. Think about Steve Jobs and Sam Altman. The thrust of what they're saying is correct, but those people were not laid off. They were fired. Okay, they were terminated for cause. Both of those decisions were reversed in days in one case and years in another. But nonetheless, that is not actually a layoff. It's also true that no one's maybe safe from being fired if they're at the level where they make enemies. But that's a completely different story. So we need to talk about what a layoff is, because I think a lot of very smart, experienced people are speaking here and elsewhere as though they don't know what a layoff actually is. I think probably they do know, but I think that it's important we get really clear on the particulars. The state of the discourse is going to be confusing for a lot of the newer people, and this is for you. Layoff does not mean the same as let go. Those words sound alike. They're not synonyms. Layoff does also not mean the same as getting fired. I call getting fired an involuntary termination for cause. You could call getting fired any involuntary termination. People use the words a little differently. Fired is just a slang term. It's not a legal term. Involuntary termination, for cause or not for cause, are the terms at work. But because fired has a negative connotation, I prefer to only use that word for the one that's for cause. But what we know about a layoff, when we hear that there's a layoff, we know it's by definition an involuntary termination, not for cause, right? Where the company is not saying that the employee did anything to cause this to happen. The burden is entirely on the company for the fact that that happened. It is a leadership failure by definition. Maybe not at that moment. Maybe there were leadership failures going months or years back that led up to it, but the company is the one at fault. While a termination for cause is typically something that happens, individually to one person as part of a carefully considered, documented decision where the company is accountable for showing that they've done so in a fair manner. An involuntary termination not for cause is nothing like that, and it's usually comes about in mass, many people at once without any kind of warning. And the biggest reasons are usually due to shifts in the economy. Now, we could think of all kinds of reasons where if someone got fired, it really wouldn't mean they're a bad employee in general. They were just wrong in that situation or something untoward happened. There's a whole field of law called, wrongful termination. But we don't even have to invoke that in the case of a layoff because, again, there's not even the expectation that the company has made a decision fair to the person impacted. It's just not the nature of the beast. So here we get to more people explaining to me helpfully that GitHub flame graphs are not the be-all end-all of productivity metrics. Couldn't agree more. The real questions are they delivering value? True value comes from finding and implementing solutions. Again, has nothing to do with this. We're talking about layoffs. Little word of advice, sometimes you will make a post and it gets more visibility than your usual audience, and you get people who are not familiar with other things you've said and may think that you have, various naive opinions that they want to push back on, and that's a good thing. That means that you're just reaching some new people. And they don't have the context that some of your other followers may have. So it's totally reasonable, but they might think that I was just being out of pocket, going with this GitHub flame graph cliche as I was. But we're talking about a layoff. We're not talking about whether this person's performing or not. But they mean well. Try to welcome your new readers. Thank you for playing, guys. Now this person, who's from a bank of some kind called, I don't know how to pronounce it, Cape Ital Oni. Anyway, they say this person was good with coding, not with PowerPoint. It sounds like they're making some kind of point about if you don't know how to, evangelize your solutions or play politics, depending on how they'd want to spin it, then your contributions won't be recognized. I mean, this in a performance eval conversation, in a raises and promotions conversation, is the sort of point we can make. This is about a layoff. Well, they may not have been aware the person that this was actually about probably has given quite a few presentations. I saw them give a Google Tech Talk 15 years ago, but I didn't provide that context because it's not relevant, because it's not performance-based, it's a layoff. Now, if you wanted to look at the banking industry and find an example where definitively people were laid off and it couldn't have had anything to do with whether or not they individually used PowerPoint or anything about their personal performance, you wouldn't have to look very far. For instance, Capital One. So last year, beginning of 2023, Capital One cut over 1,000 jobs. And these were uniformly from an entire specific group. That entire function, that role, was retired within the company. So what does that mean? Does that mean that entire role, everyone there just happened to be bad at PowerPoint or happened to have a bad GitHub flame, whatever? No, obviously not. What's typically happened here is that once it was decided to cut this much cost, there was some rapid horse trading behind the scenes going on, and executives with more influence were able to protect their favored departments from the deepest cuts. And this gets folded into, in this case, sometimes this is the case, retiring or greatly reducing a particular role and folding it in with some other responsibility. But basically, if you're in one of the more impacted areas, you're simply at greater risks. Or in this case, it's not a matter of risk. You were completely gone. You could have been the highest performing person in that group. Wouldn't have mattered. Whereas if this were a reorg that were taking place over the business's normal operation of trying to improve itself with like careful, deliberative decisions, then even if they wanted to retire a department, they would be trying to move the high performers onto different areas, find some more gentle things we could do. Some other interesting thing here, just a couple of years previous, Capital One had said we plan to hire more than 3,000 people. So what happened there? We've got to grow as fast as we can. We've got to add 3,000 people, do all this cloud migration and AI work, not a bad idea in retrospect. And all suddenly, whoops, we've got to cut 1,000. This being a Wall Street Journal article, they're hinting at the economic context that is behind this. So let's look, and this is from MacroTrends, but it is simply it's called the federal funds rate. When people say interest rates are low, interest rates are high, ultimately that stems from this. This is interesting. So we have it very low for a year and a half here, and then it's very high. I mean, not historically high or anything. 5% isn't really that high, but higher than it had been in some recent years. So where do Capital One's mass hiring and mass layoffs fit in that? Oh, okay. So we've got plan to hire over 3,000 is right here in the valley here, and layoff 1,000 is right up at the peak. So this isn't sounding like any one person didn't know how to use PowerPoint, is it? This doesn't sound like any one person was a low performer, does it? This sounds like there are large systemic forces at work. Part of what happens here is there's investor pressure that shifts with these forces. The company's not reacting to individual performance in a layoff. They're reacting to, we say market forces, investor pressure often. More pointedly, they were reacting to these pressures when they did the unsustainable hiring that resulted in the need to do these cuts later. And while it is a little surprising that Capital One wouldn't be able to avoid falling prey to these kind of classic economic cycles, being that they're a bank, and a pretty good bank by all accounts, they are certainly not the only people caught in this web. We can see from layoffs.fyi, tech layoffs since COVID-19 started. And you see last year was really in the thick of it. We've got some now still in 2024. Some people are saying there'll be another big wave. Some people are saying it's still just petering out. Computer, let's put that against the original interest rate graph, but superimpose it so the time windows are identical. All right. So, look at what's happening now. Yeah. So this is kind of a hurricane we're all in. I don't think anyone's ever checked your commit graphs before layoffs. Probably not very often. More likely the company came up with a number of dollars to save and started cutting based on salary. Yeah, that's right. So sometimes they say, last in, first out, right? The least experienced people get laid off first. Sometimes it's the people who are the most expensive. You can imagine if you need to make deep cuts, you can get fewer people. Maybe the people that won't be, really hurt as much by it anyway, if you start cutting from the highest salaries. And sometimes they do something completely other. But the point is you'll never know. The company's not under any obligation for it to make any kind of sense. It is not for cause. It is not the victim's fault. So thanks, Other Ray. You're right on the money. And we're having fun here, but these are honestly brutal events. If you've been through this, they happen very disorientingly, very rapidly from the perspective of most of the employees. And there is kind of a good reason for that. I say good. There's no good way to do a layoff. There's bad ways and worse ways. The fact that one has happened means that there just was an earlier failure. All the means that could have prevented that have failed. So we've already lost. But as I say, some ways are worse than others, and the least wrong way is as rapidly as possible. And there's a pretty clear reason for that, which is that once the decision comes down that the cuts need to be made, that is very volatile information. It can't be allowed to spread. You can't give a company the normal notice that some big change is coming that you would want to do for people's well-being. You simply can't say, hey, in 2 months there are going to be a bunch of layoffs. That would instantly tank morale, and then instead of wondering for a few hours or a few days if people still had a job, they would be wondering it for months on end. This is one of those rare situations where, given the dire nature of what has to happen, there's just no opportunity to provide people a chance to prepare for it. And if I seem to have a bit of an edge addressing any of the comments here, it's not directed at them. You might be able to tell this is an important issue for me. People's well-being and mental health is very important for me. It's something that's made a lot of difference in my life. The research that has been done suggests that every 5,000 layoffs on average equates to one extra suicide. Now, I've never attempted suicide personally, and I've never been, as they say, impacted by a layoff, meaning that I was one of the ones terminated. But everyone in the company is impacted by a mass layoff in some pretty significant senses. In a previous company, in the turmoil of the situation that was surrounding a layoff, I had a nervous breakdown. I spent a week in the hospital. I also have a family member who works at a subsidiary of Amazon that over the course of 1 year had 2 layoff cycles totaling 50% of the company total. This doesn't have to happen. It can be prevented. There are companies where this doesn't happen. They just take the appropriate steps to prevent it. Who's next? It's time to stop romanticizing this kind of measure as a professional. Yeah, that's not what I was trying to do. Simple misunderstanding, new reader. Either you are good or you aren't. Elite and top professionals don't get fired. That's a fact. Okay. I'm sorry, sir. You are waving a matador flag in front of me right now. And I see that you yourself are an executive. You should know better, honestly, than to say something like this. Again, we're not talking about someone that got fired. We're talking about layoffs. And you're contending that in this kind of decision that's made with this kind of turmoil, that it would always be something that was a fair representation of their performance, and you don't know anything about who this person is or what they've accomplished. You don't know. And yet you're saying that an executive that made a judgment like that would know? Do you see an inherent contradiction there? You don't know even the company that this was about. It was Google. You don't know how many other people were let go. It was around 1,000. Another 12,000 last year. You don't know the quality of this person's work and that a lot of us have been using it for many years. And you jump to that conclusion well convinced that a person under pressure to make certain cuts and just reach certain numbers with no particular vested interest to preserve this or that person many levels down from them, that they must be making a decision that reflects the individual. I wouldn't be bringing this up if you were the only person who says such things. It is a common misconception, but it's a harmful one. People have the just world hypothesis, also known as the just world fallacy, right? Where it's more comforting to believe that if something bad happens to someone, that they deserved it or they did something to bring it about or it was somehow inside their control. And when we're talking about a layoff, we can't talk that way. It is not in the person's control. It never was. It is the company's responsibility to figure out how not to let that happen again. If there is a problem with someone's performance, the company should address that using the normal, carefully considered process they have established as the way that they do that, one which they are legally accountable for. So honestly, I've never been fired and I've never been laid off, but the reasons why are completely different, as I see it. I haven't been fired, and I've gotten promoted a decent amount of times because I know how to be a good performer in various ways that matter, and also to market myself, and also a little bit of luck and privilege. The reason I wasn't laid off is I weren't in the departments getting deep cuts. Simple as that. If I was in another role, when those roles were under target, it wouldn't matter how performant I was. I knew the people in the roles that got cut, and I know that many of them were amazing at their job, had recently been promoted, whatever criteria you like. So for people that are worried that you might get affected by something like this, I can tell you this isn't one of the times where hard work will help you. You can try to stay out of harm's way. You can try to be in a department that's less likely to get cut in such a situation. Or you can try to be at a company that, as a matter of course, doesn't do layoffs. Maybe they're more level with their growth or something else about their business model, albeit the times I've experienced layoffs, it was the first time the company had done it, right? So how would I have known? But as I say, developing career security rather than job security, so just lower the stakes of it if it does happen, is one of the best things I think you can do, making the difference between it being 6 weeks to your next job or 6 months. I mean, that's a big difference. If it does happen to you, try not to judge yourself. And definitely let's not judge others that this happens to. Let's not add insult to injury here. Let's remember where the responsibility lies. It's with leadership. Now, I do believe engineers have plenty of responsibilities to do well at their job, right? That's what this whole channel is about. I spend a lot of time at work and at home, here, elsewhere, trying to coach people to being better software professionals. So I'm holding up my end of the bargain. I'm asking for leaders and executives to also be professionals and also engage in systemic problem solving to figure out how we don't do this. As you are painfully aware, it doesn't just impact the people impacted. It impacts the entire company. There's a healing process. What we need is to restore trust. One thing I very much need from leaders, if we are to restore trust in this climate in the industry, is don't piss on me and tell me it's raining. And as Lao Tzu said in the Tao Te Ching, with patience, the most tangled cord may be undone. Thank you.